Howdy y'all, namaste, and welcome back to the next stop on this, howdy y'all, namaste, and howdy y'all, namaste, and welcome back. We're still continuing our pre-departure in this religious quest. We haven't quite left the station or left the dock yet. And in this particular video, I'm not going to do a whole bunch of tricks to try and grab your attention or keep your attention. This quest is like any other. You only get out of it as much as you put into it. Right? If you're not going to put attention, if you're not going to pay attention, you're not going to receive anything, right? Nothing comes for nothing. So this course, you're required to pay attention. If you're not going to pay attention, if you just have this on in the background or whatever, then, I don't know, go do something else. This is, you only get out of it what you put into it. So I'm not going to do a whole lot to try and grab your attention or hold your attention or keep your attention at this point, right? Because before we go on this religious quest together, right, you have to decide whether or not you want to. If you want to make a commitment to it, then commit to it and pay the fare, which is attention. And if not, all good, right? It's all good, man. But, don't have it on in the background or something like that. So one of my favorite theologians is Meister Eckhart. Eckhart was this German theologian, way back in the day, many centuries ago, and one of the greatest ever, really. Just a really amazing, original, deep, provocative, amazing thinker and theologian. And he was not excommunicated from the church. He wasn't hung or burned at the stake or anything like that. But, he was on his way, at least to becoming excommunicated. The church was like, yeah, you got to go. And he asked why, right? Is it because of what I'm teaching? It's, because what I'm teaching, the theology that I'm giving, it's the same theology that all these other theologians before me, like Augustine, and it's consistent with the Gospel of John, and it's consistent with so many things that have been taught, orthodox teachings of the church. How can you excommunicate me for just saying all these things that have been said by these great wise thinkers before? And the Vatican's response was, true, but you're saying them in German. Now, let me just kind of explain what that means. Eckhart wasn't in trouble for writing the theology that he did, or saying the theology that he said. Eckhart got in trouble for saying it in a language that people could understand. He got in trouble for teaching it too well, right? He got in trouble because he was explaining it to everybody, right? Trying to explain it in a way that everybody could understand, or to teach all Christians the theology that he was teaching, which was Orthodox theology, which was straight from the Bible, which was consistent with what the greatest theologians in the history of the church have been saying. And the church said, yeah, but they did it in Latin. Only well-educated people could read it, right? There was no danger of folks like us misunderstanding it or getting the wrong idea, right? But you don't want all the rest of the folks like getting the wrong idea or misunderstanding it. Misunderstanding can be a dangerous thing. And, I am going to side with Eckhart on this one, but I also understand where the church was coming from, right? Sometimes really good ideas are taken and twisted and distorted, right? Like in that Sahana video, right? The second video on the mantra, right? You've got to approach it in the right way. We've got to approach it with an open mind, approach it with a clear mind. If our minds or our hearts are disturbed or distorted, then the thing that we're learning is going to be disturbed or distorted, which can lead to disturbed and distorted kind of actions and behaviors or ethics, right? So this was the church's point, was that it's dangerous if you're teaching something that's powerful and you're teaching it to everybody around you in a way that they can understand but might misunderstand, right, if they're not paying attention. So, you only get out of it what you put into it. And if you put something distorted into it, then you're likely to get something out of it that's distorted. In which case, it's better if we just might not go on this quest. I want only people who only want folks on this quest that want to go on it, right? So if that's you, then word up. Let's have fun, right? Let's see what's out there. If not, then fine. It's all good, man. Let's start over. A new creation, a new beginning, starting over. We haven't left the dock yet, but still, let's start over again. Right? We'll kind of do that a lot in this course on creation, creativity, and recreation, starting over, right? So let's start over, and then we're going to shift our attention to phenomenology. Word. All right. So, phenomenology. So, phenomenology. This course is going to teach you phenomenology. It's going to model, as best as I can, the phenomenological method. And I want you to practice the phenomenological method, right? If you read the syllabus, you know that like 3 of the 4 course objectives are about those 3 things, right? One is the phenomenological method and how to developing a working knowledge of it through practicing it, which is what the podcast assignments and our meetings on Monday nights and things like that are about, having this sort of discourse, which is a particular mode of discourse, which is a philosophical or theological mode of discourse, in which we're practicing the phenomenological method. Now, first thing I got to do is teach you what the phenomenological method is. So this is my first crack at that. I'm not going to teach the whole thing all at once, but just to give you a quick taste of it. Then I'm going to keep modeling it over and over and over again through the next 3 chapters, right? It's not just about teaching you the method, but using the method in order to... The method is a mode of inquiry. It's a mode of figuring something out, a mode of investigation, right? Now, a lot of my students hear this mode of investigation and they think, and they say, like that's really similar to the scientific method. And it is, because the scientific method is also a method of phenomenology. There's lots of different methods of phenomenology, and this is one of them, and the scientific method is a different one. And the chemists will have a slightly different method than physicists or biologists, right? Because they're studying slightly different things. They're all going to be using phenomenological methods of studying phenomena, and checks and balances in order to distinguish, as all phenomenology must do. The most important thing about phenomenology is it has to distinguish between the thing itself, the Ding an sich in German, the thing itself, the thing that you're studying, whatever it is, right? Whatever thing you're studying, it could be geological formations, right? It could be rabbits. It could be COVID virus. It could be the weather. It could be nursing. It could be cancer, ideas, justice, truth, religion, right? It can be so many things. Whatever it is that we're studying, that thing, right? We have to distinguish, on the one hand, between that thing that we were trying to study, that thing that we're trying to figure out what it is, right? We've got to distinguish between that thing the thing itself, and the phenomenon. Sounds easy, right? It's not. It's important. It's a significant distinction between these two things, right? So what is the phenomenon, and how is it different than the thing itself, right? The phenomenon, let me give you a definition of the word phenomenon. The phenomenon is that which appears to the conscious mind. Now, talk about these glasses, right? Talk about the glasses. Now, on the one hand, there's these glasses, which I'm holding in my hand, which you're seeing a digital image of it, right? Through pixels of light, which are being projected by your computer screen or TV screen or whatever device you're watching this on, your phone or whatever, tablets, right? So you're seeing light that's coming out of those pixels. That's still not even the phenomenon though, right? The light that's coming out of the device that you're watching on, whether it's a tablet, let's say it's a tablet, right? The screen that you're watching on right now, that screen, right, between my face and you right now, that screen, right, is the thing. It's a thing that's shooting out light waves. Those light waves are hitting the rods and cones in your eyeball, right? Back of your eye has rods and cones. They receive that light that's coming into your eyes, right? Then it converts those. There's a significant change that happens right there, right? Where that light wave, those photons, or auditory, signals in your eardrums, where those analog signals, if you want, right? The light waves and those sound waves and other things, where they enter your organs of sense, right? Your eardrums and your eyeballs and that sort of thing. And they're converted at that point to an electrical signal, right? A neuroelectrical signal that fires neurons in your brains, right? Neurotransmitters releasing neurotransmitters across synaptic boundaries and those kind of things, right? Axons and dendrites and electrical signals traveling through those neurons, and they get to your, in the case of visual seeing, they go to the visual cortex, and then your mind, your brain, right, produces this phenomenon, that which appears to the conscious mind, right? So then when I say the phenomenon, I mean that thing in your head, right? That thing that you're seeing or that thing that you're hearing, right? So when we're talking about the phenomenon, it's not what the ears are hearing, but it's you hearing what the ear hears. You hearing the ear, right? When the ear turns those vibrations and whatnot into electrical signals, and then they get reconstituted and they appear to your conscious mind, right? So then there's all of a sudden we've got three things. We've got this thing itself, right? The glasses, right? These glasses that I'm holding in my hand. Light bounces off of here. It goes into the pixels in the like CMOS or whatever. I don't know how cameras work, right? But it gets recorded on the CMOS, right? Which measures light sensitivity and light waves and all those kind of things. It gets converted into digital data. It goes through the interwebs, right? And then all this magic happens with codecs and decodecs and, Weissman index or whatever. And it gets like converted, right, into light waves, which then go into your eye, which then get converted again into electrical impulses, which then your mind reconstitutes, or that which appears to your conscious mind. So it's sort of a creation of your brain, which hopefully corresponds to something outside. In this case, far outside, right? These are my glasses here in this place at my house in New Hampshire on a particular date that's different than the one you're watching, right? So that's quite a big difference between that thing and that phenomenon which appears to your head. But then we start to notice that there's also another thing behind that, which is seeing it, right? Or hearing it. So there's sort of this conscious perceiver, right? This conscious perceiver or I, right? So we start thinking of that I, which is seeing in this case, the glasses, which are in your head, right, which are different than the glasses that are in my hands, in my fingers, right? So now we've got to distinguish between the thing itself, whatever it is we're studying, and then the phenomenon, and then we begin to recognize the conscious perceiver. Maybe there's other things, but we're just getting started. This is just my quick introduction to phenomenology. So phenomenology is the study of phenomena, but the phenomenon is that which appears to your conscious mind, right? It's up here, right? It's not the thing out there. It's the thing that's up here, right? And then we can, kind of project or understand this conscious I or conscious. A lot of this stuff is things that I talk about more in my philosophy of human person class, right? Which is not this, but nevertheless, in order to do any sort of inquiry, to study something, right, and to check our biases and that sort of thing, we have to distinguish between the thing itself and that which appears to our conscious mind, recognizing that that which appears to our conscious mind is sort of a reconstitution or a reconstruction or a recreation of the world that's outside, right? So we've got sort of that external thing, what causes my perception, then the mental object, what I see, smell, taste, feel, or hear in my head, right? And then there's that I behind it, right? And so the one that is experiencing things, what we call that experiencer, right? And creator is that which is experiencing the world which is constructed or created by neurotransmitters firing in rapid succession in close proximity, right, in our visual cortex or auditory cortex or the brain as a whole, right, however you want to say it, right, which are receiving matter and energy from the outside, which are stimulating our, right, sense organs. So then we've got the world in se, in Latin, the world, the cosmos in se, the world itself, the world out there, right? And then we've got the world constructed or recreated in our heads, right? This is important for a whole lot of reasons, but one, of course, is to recognize bias and how we, how are we constructing the world based on the information that we have and all sorts of things, right? And but let's notice here various states of consciousness. We'll come back to this later too, right? All of this, we're going to come back to this. But there may be more. There may be one more. But there's at least these three states of consciousness, which we can distinguish when. One is when we're awake, when we're alert, when we're attentive, right? Hopefully you're awake, alert, and attentive, right? Hopefully attentive to this, right? But if you're watching this, hopefully that's where your attention is, right? Depends on your intentions. So your attention largely depends on your intentions. What do you intend to pay attention to? Unless you have no control over your attention, right? Unless you have a deficit of attention control, in which case you're distracted, inattentive, right? Or maybe dreaming. Maybe your mind is dreaming, right? So kids and I have been watching this show on Netflix called Sandman, and which is Neil Gaiman, which is really, really good. I'm actually watching it for the second time, for the first time with the kids. Speak very highly of that show. It's really good, really entertaining, really. It's Neil Gaiman, am I right? But anyway, it's about Morpheus, the Lord of Dreaming, right? And Morpheus comes from the word morphe, which means form, right? The forms. That's what forms? So the forms that the way some Indian philosophers, Mimamskas in particular, and some others, or some Mimamskas, describe it as like the mind is sort of like a lump of clay, like a gana, pragnana gana, a lump of consciousness that then is shaped by the world, right, into these different shapes, right? And so this pragnana gana, this lump of consciousness, is shaped by the things out there. And whether it's, if we're awake and attentive, then it may be those external things that we're attending to, where we're putting our attention here or there, right, which causes us to perceive that thing, which causes our our mind, right, to take that particular shape, right, or our consciousness to take that particular shape, to create that mental object. And when we're asleep, our mind still is very active, right, and jumps. We can have all these shapes even when our eyes are closed, even when we're not alert or not attentive or asleep, right, when we're not paying attention to the things that are around our body, but instead still see all these vivid dreams and have these vivid imaginations, right? Images and sounds, and we can hear things and taste things and feel things and experience things, right? All sorts of things while we're dreaming, because our mind is taking on these various forms, which at least in that moment don't correspond to anything outside, right? Because our eyes are closed and we're not paying attention to that, right? But then maybe something could wake us up, right? So some loud noise or something could wake us up, cause us to be alert, and then become attentive to the things that are around us in a particular way. Like, let's say you're watching this and you're really focused on it and you're really attentive and you're really getting a lot out of what I'm saying right now. And then all of a sudden someone comes in the door, right, and distracts you, or your phone dings or something. But if somebody walks in the door and finds you there, sees you there, right, your roommate or somebody, then you become aware, oh, I'm not, all right, you become aware of your subjectivity as an object, or you become seen, right, not just seer, but seen. And that can make us, jar us into seeing ourselves as something seen. Meant to go there a little bit later, talking about Mayra Rivera and Franz Fanon, this sort of mirror state where you recognize yourself being recognized or being seen by somebody else. Then some of these, right, you experience yourself sort of as the cause of somebody else's phenomenon. Anyway, maybe I'm definitely getting too ahead of myself here. Right, so we can distinguish between these three basic columns. Later I'm going to add more, actually. But let's get these three basic columns, right, and how they relate to one another. So the thing itself, the thing out there in the world, the thing that's external to us, right? And then there's that thing as we create it or recreate it or imagine it or hear it or perceive it as a phenomenon in our heads, right? Differing between the perception that we do with our eyes or our ears versus the perception of our conscious mind. Here's another example. Here's an example I give a lot. Maybe this will help. Right? So I am very forgetful and I lose things all the time. I'm not very well organized and all that kind of stuff. I'm always, I don't know, typical philosopher in some ways, I guess. And I've learned, right, to just put my keys on the counter right by the door, right? Because that's when I leave, I need my keys, and that's where they should be. And when I come in, I just try to take my keys out and put them right there, right? So I always know my keys are here. No mystery where my keys are. When I gotta go, that's where my keys are. Sometimes I gotta go, I'm late, right? And I run there, and I look there, and my keys aren't there. Where are my keys? Why? They're supposed to be there. I always put them there. I must have put them somewhere else. I must have forgotten to put them there. I got distracted and I didn't put them there. Where are my keys? I run all around, look for the keys, and take all of my pants out of the dirty laundry and go through all the pockets, and I look everywhere, and I look under the bed, and I rip the bed apart and look everywhere. Where are my keys? And saying all sorts of things. And then finally I'm like, I don't know. Just gotta go. I don't know what my plan is. I'm gonna walk 20 miles or something like that. So right, I just gotta go. I don't know what else to do. I gotta go. I'm late. I gotta go. And I go back to the door and I look where they're supposed to be, right? Because I'm just gonna curse the counter. And I look and they're right there. They're right there. How? What do you mean they're right there? They're right there. Right? How did I look there? I feel like I looked there 3 or 4 times and they weren't there, and now I look and they're there. Is this something that's ever happened to you? I feel like it's not just something that happens to me. I feel like it's something that happens to people, because when our minds, especially when we're stressed, right, if we're like anxious or stressed or distracted or whatever, right, then our attention doesn't get turned to that thing. Our mind, so right, our conscious perceiver is perceiving other mental objects which are not corresponding to things in the external world, right? So we could say, if my keys are there on the counter, right, I think I've got keys, yeah, my keys are there, right? They should be by the door. But if my keys are there on the counter, right, then my eyes, as long as the lights are on and the keys are in plain sight and, you know, my eyes are working and open and everything, then my eyes, we could say my eyes are seeing the keys, right? Light is bouncing off of the keys, bouncing into my rods and cones and exciting those rods and cones and sending electrical signals to my brain, perhaps even making this mental object or this visual image of it back there. We could debate that, sure, whether or not that's happening. But what's definitely not happening is I am not seeing them, right? So I am not experiencing them. My attention is not towards this mental object that is caused by this external thing, which is very much visible, but instead my conscious perceiving mind is drawn towards this, that, or whatever, which it's creating, right? Because of its distracted or inattentive or dreaming or morphaic, right? Taking different, morphing into different kinds of things, right? Than what's there. Now, we can also identify rather easily another state of consciousness, right? Which is just because I'm not, so when am I not perceiving anything? It's when I'm unconscious, right? When this conscious perceiver is not perceiving anything, right? So it has no content, nothing in this column. There's still lots of stuff out there in this, right? There's still lots of stuff out there to be seen or heard or tasted or felt or whatever. The world is still out there when I'm in this state of deep sleep or in a coma, right? But nothing's happening here. So this isn't seeing, or at least there's something that's not happening here, right? So this conscious eye is not conscious of this or that, right? So phenomenology. Phenomenology means that we've got to, or phenomenology begins with us distinguishing between the thing itself, the ding on such, the thing that we're studying, and the phenomenon, that which appears to our conscious mind, right? This is sort of central to phenomenology. So we've got to, one of the things that we do in phenomenology by having discourse, right, by having phenomenological or discourse, by having discourse with our neighbors, is then it's like, you know, do you see my keys? Do you see my glasses? Do you see what I'm seeing? Right? So sometimes we say things like that. Do you see what I'm seeing? Is what I'm seeing? Are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing? What are you seeing? Wait, are you seeing something different? Right? So then we begin to ask one another this thing, right? So there's the thing. This is what my brain is telling me, right? My brain is telling me I have this mental object that I'm seeing with my eyes or with my ears or with my senses, right? Does it correspond to something out there? Am I right about what I'm seeing, right? And so then the question is, how many confirmations do you need, right? Do you need confirmation from one person or two people or 1,000 people, right? So how much confirmation is enough? Would one more perspective be enough to change how we all think about this thing that we're all perceiving, right? Or seeing things. So let's talk briefly about this kid, Edmund Husserl. You know, I'm going to get his book. I guess I can try taking this. Is this going to work? So this guy, Edmund Husserl. Right up here. Wonderful. Totally not worth it. No part of that was worth it. So this guy, Edmund Husserl. My book is falling apart. This book was a gift by Professor Charles Courtney at Drew Theological Seminary. Thank you, Dr. Courtney. He's always going to be Dr. Courtney, I think, to me. But Ideas by Edmund Husserl. And in here, phenomenology is not a new thing. Phenomenology did not start with Edmund Husserl, right? But he did take it he did take it in a new way. Husserl, when he's explaining it in this book, Ideas, he uses the example of a playing die, just a regular playing die, right? Like this one. This one is super special because my daughter made it by hand, which is kind of cool, right? Because she knows that I teach phenomenology and she knows I'm always using a die in class, so she made me a die to use, which is way cool. Husserl used this example of a die, right? And he said, so like, suppose there's a normal playing die, right? So when we see this thing, we perceive this thing, light bounces off of the object, the external thing, and it goes into our eyeballs. For the sake of this example, we're just going to like pretend that you're in the room, not watching it on a screen, because it's actually quite different phenomenologically when you're watching it on a screen than when you're in the room seeing the analog thing, right? Because the light is bouncing off of this thing, not created by the tablet or whatever you're watching, right? But instead, light's created by that source, which bounces off of here and then goes into your eyes and your rods and cones. Then your brain, right, creates or recreates this external thing, which is the cause of the perception, the perceptive cause, the material cause of the act of the perception, right? And then your mind creates a mental object, a thing. It's created by your mind. Then you see that, right? Now, Husserl says the problem is when you think about when most people look at an ordinary playing die, they, maybe he played against people, maybe he played a dice game against people who cheated, right? With like a weighted die, right? You can imagine like a weighted die, it looks the same as other ones. And so, you expect it to behave the way others do, but maybe there's 2 6s on it, or maybe it's heavier on one side, or maybe, right, there could be more than meets the eye. But when a normal person looks at a regular playing die, they just assume a lot, right? The brain just sort of fills in all the gaps. And even if it has differing numbers on differing sides, your mind says, well, this is a 6-sided figure and it has 6, different numbers, 6 different number of dots on each side, right? 1 dot on one side, right? And 6 dots on the opposite side, right? 4 on one side and 3 on the opposite side, right? So if you're seeing things from a different perspective, right? If you're seeing it from here versus if you're seeing it from over there versus if you're seeing it from that angle, right? So the thing that appears to your conscious mind, the mental object created by your mind, is going to be different based on the angle of perception, right? Your perspectival starting point, where you're coming from, right? It's going to look different based on where you're coming from. But he says, the problem is, since we're pretty familiar with a die, everybody knows, like, yeah, I know what a die is. I play D&D all the time, or I play whatever game that involves rolling dice, Monopoly or Life or something like that, right? So I expect certain things. So my mind just says, yeah, I know what that is, right? And fills in the gaps, right? It's also racism or sexism in a nutshell too, right? We see a person, we see a thing, and our mind says, I know what that thing is, right? And based on my experiences, I can fill in all these gaps. So our mind fills in all these gaps, right, by creating this mental object. Most of the work, though, is done by our minds, right, not by the visual data coming in from that external object, right? So Husserl's like, well, okay, so how do we? That's the problem, right? It's a problem. That's a problem that's a problem, isn't it? How do we, if most of the world that we perceive by our subjective mind is created by our minds, then how do we know that there's a correspondence between what is created by our minds and the world out there? It's a big problem. If you're following me, if you understand what I've been saying, then you see that's a big problem, right? And so in science and chemistry or in biology or physics or any of those hard sciences, right, they are aware of this problem for sure, right? Obviously, the purpose of the scientific method is to enable us to distinguish between those two things, right? So it's like, all right, I'm going to look at this thing. You look at that thing. too, right? And you look at that thing, 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 and you look at that thing. And if we all go through these different, if we all do a serious, careful investigation, trying to check our biases and check our experiences at the door and just focus on, you know, those external things as they're coming into our minds. And if we all do that, and then we come together and we talk about it and we say, so then what if you go over there and you do your experiment, right? And you say, you come back and you say, all right, it's a square with 3 dots, right? I've looked at it, looked at it, and looked at it, and looked at it, and looked at it, and studied it. It is a square, it's 4 right angles with 3 dots. And then I come and I say, no, it's a square, has 4 right angles, but it has 4 dots on it, 4 very round circles on it, not 3. Right? You missed one. Go back and check again. Okay. So then, right, but if we begin to triangulate, if we, through our discourse, if we say, all right, maybe it's because of where you're coming from, right? Maybe it's because of where I'm coming from. What if I were to like come over there where you are, right? And you were to go over there where I was, right? What if we were to see this thing from a different angle, right? Maybe seeing it from a different perspective would help us to understand that it's not just the thing itself that matters, and it's not just the phenomena which is created by our conscious mind, but maybe it also has to do with our perspectival starting point, right? Where we're coming from. So if we want to sort of, like, let's imagine we wanted to enter lots of data into a computer, right? And you wanted to sort of recreate this. Hi, you're very scary. Hi, Kitty. Let's say we want to try and recreate this thing, right? Using all the data that we have. So we'd have to type in the data, precisely what we see, right? Carefully describing the phenomenon, right? Because that's all we have access to. We don't have access to this external thing, right? We've already established that. We only have access to this. So the question is this, which is the only thing I have access to, right? Does it correspond to the outside world? In order to know that, I kind of need to find out what's in your head, what's in your head, what's in his head, what's in her head, what's in their head. If we want to type all this in a computer, right, then what do you see? I'll type what I see. But then we also have to tell the computer, right, what's our proximity? What's our relationship to the thing itself, right? What's our proximity? What's our history with it? Where are we coming from, right? Which is why I start every semester, including this course, right? Every course, every semester, by getting to know each other, right? By telling you something about where I'm coming from, what my credentials and lived experiences are, right? Where I'm coming from, why I'm interested, why I'm motivated in this topic, and where I'm coming from. And that's why I meet with each and every student at the beginning of the semester, as I've been meeting with students a lot today and a lot over the past week, you know, and have lots of meetings scheduled with students this week to find out, where are you coming from? Yeah, where are you coming from? Couple more points, and then I want to draw this to a conclusion. One, so I mentioned Edmund Husserl, right? He's the DI guy, wrote this book, A General Introduction to Pure Phenomenology. Robert Neville came around, and Robert Neville, we'll talk about him more later. Just want to say this one little thing about Neville. So Neville's a great philosopher, a great theologian, a great scholar of religion, checks all the boxes. Great, awesome beard too. But he's and just like a super nice guy. And anyway, can't say enough good things about him. Robert Neville said that you know, he's also a phenomenologist, and if we're going to study a particular phenomenon, right, we need to begin by whatever this thing is, right? So we're talking about this thing itself. We need to keep this as vague as possible, right? Now, if we're talking about chemistry, right? We want to study this compound, then we want to be as specific as possible to get exactly what this compound is. What is this? You know, let's be clear about the formula or whatever for this compound. I don't know, this chemical compound that we're studying. We got to be super specific about it. But if you're studying something like religion, then you need a slightly different method, right? And so Neville said, all right, when we're talking about something like religion, or any of the topics in religion, we need to keep those categories, keep our categories very vague, right? We can't just come in and define scripture in this really clear, narrow way. Hey, we're going to study scripture. What is scripture? Let's all get the constant definition of scripture. right? Let's start with a firm definition of Scripture. What is Scripture? Well, if we do that, Neville said, then, then we're always going to make the decision before we start the investigation, right? He said we can't make the decision about what a thing is before we start studying it. We need to start by keeping our idea of what it is very vague, right? Specific enough that we can kind of say, all right, ritual. We're talking about ritual. What do we mean by ritual? Do we mean things like things that are done in a church? Well, that's a pretty narrow understanding of ritual, right? Do we mean things that are done in a habitual way? Well, then maybe that's too broad because, I eat dinner every night, but I don't think of it as a ritual. But if I say a prayer before dinner every night, then that seems to be kind of more of a ritual, right? So how do we define these kind of things? Let's start by keeping those categories really vague, right? If somebody always does the same things on July 4th every year, right? These are our family traditions, and we do these these practices in this ritualistic way every year, then why aren't those, right? Those would seem to fit certain categories of, cultic practices or rituals, right? Things that are done in a ritualistic way. So Neville said, let's basically, whatever that thing we're putting in the middle, right? This thing itself, this thing that we're studying, before we start to study it, we got to keep it vague, right? Our definition of it needs to be super vague because, in fact, we're trying to find out what are the boundaries, right? What is this thing? By finding out what this thing is or what this thing isn't, it means finding out what this thing is and what this thing isn't, right? So let's find the boundary. So if we pretend like we know the boundaries before we start, then what are we studying it for, right? But instead, let's keep our categories vague. And then Mayra Rivera and Franz Fanon, the only thing I wanted to say about them, I was going to move. Anyway, thinking movable dots, but I kind of forgot to move them. Part of what they're saying is we need to recognize ourselves and think about how we play a part in this, right? What does it feel like to be looked at from somebody else's perspective? What is it like to be objectified, to have someone look at you as an object, right? To sort of reduce you to certain categories or reduce you to certain behaviors or reduce you to your skin color or reduce you to your gender or your clothes or your socioeconomic status or your accent, right? What does it feel like to have other humans reduce you into a particular box, right? To put you in a box and to put you in a category. How does that feel? I mean, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good when anybody does that. It doesn't feel good for anybody to have that done to them, right? And part of why it doesn't feel good is because we feel like we're being reduced to this external object, which is just being reduced to this person's construction of us in their heads at that particular moment, right? Ignoring all of our subjectivity and our being our being a conscious perceiver, right? These kind of things, being an experiencer, but reducing our status as an experiencer to just being something that's experienced by an other person, right? Adam Smith also talked about this in terms of like objectification is a sin or something that harms another and requires a particular piacular responsibility, which is actually his definition of profit, which I think is kind of cool, but definitely off topic for today. But the point is, right, if we're studying somebody else's religious practices, somebody else's religious beliefs, somebody else's religious rituals or texts or scriptures, right, then we need to be careful not to reduce that person and their complexity, or not to reduce that ritual or that reduce that text or that thing to, whatever box that we want to put it into in a particular moment, right? And Neville's saying, well, let's make sure that box is really big and really vague. And does it have to be a box, or can we just we just gotta all right, we're kind of looking at some kind of practice over here, right? And let's just see it for what it is. Let's expect something new. Let's allow it to be unique. Let's allow it to be what it is, and just try to see it or perceive it as clearly as we can without adding a whole bunch of stuff on it, right? Husserl said, right? To try and see the thing itself. So there's this other philosopher, this other phenomenologist that I wrote a book about, that gave this definition of phenomenology. His definition of phenomenology is this. I should write it on the board, I guess. So this philosopher, this phenomenologist, he redefined phenomenology as letting be seen, or allowing to be seen, right? A process that allows us. So a phenomenological method is a process or a method that allows or lets be seen what? That which shows itself from itself in the very way that it shows itself from itself, right? Not reducing that thing itself to just a mere phenomenon, a mere object, a mere mental object that's been created or recreated by our mind, right, for the sake of experiencing it for ourselves, reducing that other thing to an object of our perception, an object of our consciousness, but instead allowing it to be seen in precisely the way it wants to be seen, right? To allow your neighbor to define themselves, to define himself, to define herself, to define their self, the way that they want to define themselves and show themselves and present themselves, and to allow them to be seen in the very way that they show themselves from themselves, right? So there's an ethical aspect to phenomenology, but also, right, helps us to see the world more clearly. So this is the method that we're using in this course, this semester. Phenomenological method. As I said, this is not the first time that, this is not the last time that I'm going to explain it. It's not the last time. I've got another video on phenomenology where I use a light board and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes my language, because I'm trying to make it easily accessible, slips here and there, right? But I wanted to introduce it in this way to get us started, right? So that we can embark on this phenomenological quest, this philosophical quest, this religious quest, right, through various understandings of what does creation mean, what does creativity mean, and what does recreation or recreation or play or recreating mean, right? What's the relationship between creation, creativity, and recreation? And what are some of these religious texts and religious practices and religious believers around us, how do they weigh in on those particular questions, right? So allowing these notions of creation, creativity, and recreation to be vague, right? To be a vague category, as Neville says, and not to reduce other people's religion or other people's perspectives or other people's rituals or other people to objects, right? But instead to allow them to be seen in the very way that they show themselves from themselves, right? Which requires that we kind of check our expectations, check our biases, check are those things at the door, but also that we pay attention, right? That we're attentive to the details, that we're attentive to how they show themselves from themselves. Because if we aren't attentive to those things, if we're inattentive, then we're likely to get a twisted distortion, a misrepresentation, a mischaracterization, a misunderstanding, because we're creating this other in our heads, right? And we're seeing that other that we've created by our minds rather than allowing that other to be an other subject, an other self, an other I that shows themselves from themselves in the very way that they want to show themselves from themselves, and we want a process that will allow us to see them in that way, right? So if we go into this assuming, oh, I know what religion is, now I'm going to learn this. This is all the things I'm going to learn, right? So my alarm just went off telling me that I've got to meet with a student in a minute. So we got to go into it with, a tranquil mind, a clear heart, an open mind, but also knowing that we're only going to get out of it what we put into it, right? So as attentive as we are, that, if we pay attention, then we should expect something in return. And if we don't pay attention, we shouldn't expect to get anything in return. And the whole point of me telling the Meister Eckhart story is because it is dangerous to mischaracterize somebody else's perspective. It is dangerous to get a distorted view of another person's religious traditions. It's dangerous to get misunderstand our neighbor's religious tradition. And so if we go into it thinking ahead of time that we already know what it is, that we know what we're going to learn, or we know the kinds of things that we're going to learn, or that we're going to decide ahead of time what religion is, or what the phenomenon, what the thing is that we're studying, because we have experience with that phenomenon, then we're basically just being guided, or we're being controlled by our past experiences, our past biases, our expectations, rather than allowing that thing to be seen from itself in the very way that it shows itself from itself. Word.